Button is pushed, and I have mic now. Awesome. So, this presentation is mostly just a quick fire talk. If you went to the Blue Team workshop last Saturday, you may notice some of these slides because I kind of plugged it a little bit. But this is a talk about CCDC, learning how to Blue Team by doing the same thing over and over until it somehow works. So, here we go. So, what is CCDC? Again, CCDC stands for Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. This is where you represent RIT as a cybersecurity expert to go compete for the school against other schools. The red versus blue competitions, such as like RSEC, blue teams compete, red teams break stuff. It's really great for learning. Everything goes on fire every competition. It's a really fun time. So why should you care? Once again, it's really, really great for learning. I would say probably 50%, 67% of my knowledge is from CCDC. I learned so much about you set up services, learn everything about Windows, Linux, networking, everything. Even if you don't want to be on the team, there's practices that are starting today at about 6, 7, 5. Companies love it. It's a kind of a name that companies recognize. Big companies like Raytheon and stuff like that sponsor CCDC. So they see that, oh, you compete CCDC on your resume. They notice that. They see you're doing stuff outside of classes. It's a nice kind of thing to put on your resume. So obviously don't do that just for that, obviously. And also competitions are really fun. I personally love red team, blue team competitions. I've done probably 6, 7, 8 of them during I've been here at RIT. I've red team a ton. They're super fun. Highly recommend doing as many as you can. And it's really also really, really good, even if you don't get on the team. Doing the trial stuff is really good UB and IRSEC practice, because again, you're still learning how to blue team. Gotcha. Oh, yes, this is much better. My experience, so I joined as a freshman. So as a freshman about like 3-4 years ago, got on the team. I joined not knowing what, I came into RIT not knowing what Linux was. I didn't know what an IP address was. I didn't know what Linux was. This was all taught to me. CCDC, mentorship, RIT-Sec. Everyone on CCDC seemed like to be like an amazing god at Windows or amazing god at Linux. And you just realize they're 4th years. But yeah, you learn from them. Pretty much. You have these 4th years, these 3rd years, members previously on the team that will teach you things you need to know at CCDC. There isn't like a skill requirement. You don't have to come to practice and be like amazing at everything. You can come not knowing anything, and we'll teach you. I think it comes to the next slide. We'll read that later. My first experience was pretty much, I had a lot of practices, learned so much stuff, 10 plus hours a week. It's a really big time commitment, and lots of team bonding. We went to regionals, went to Nats. We've done that 3 years in a row. Amazing time. So this is fall practices. You get split into groups of Windows, Linux, networking. There's probably a second Linux group because it's a really large group. And you rotate throughout the semester. Every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you go to each group, and you just learn. Usually you do we look kind of like the philosophy of like you learn by practice and doing things over and over. So week 1, let's say you're on Windows. You'll be given a goal, set up a Windows server, set up an Active Directory, do all this stuff. And you may not complete that, but that's fine, because the next week you do the same thing over, but this time you'll probably get further because you know the errors you met last time, and you can fix those quicker. So that's kind of the CCDC kind of philosophy of learning is we pretty much start from scratch each time, but you get better and better at doing the very basics. So then you get farther and farther, and those basic errors that you fix, eventually during competition, when you run into those errors, when a team breaks DNS, you realize, oh, that was a DNS issue when I was first setting it up. I know it's now a DNS issue in competition. Stuff like that, which is why CCDC really good for learning. It's open to everyone. Again, no skill requirement. And at the end of the semester, we have like a mini competition. It's not like as big as IRSEC or ISTS, but it's kind of mini just between the people at CCDC. For those who want to compete to try and get on the team, the competition doesn't actually decide whether or not you get on the team. It's just to see how you work as a group. Spring practices are mostly just for the people who are now on the team. It's a lot more intense, but usually twice a week. Probably still open to people who dedicated and want to learn, but this is mostly for the team to start practicing for the competitions that happen in the spring semester. They, eventually will start to be tailored for the topology that we get as they get released. So, quals, we now know there's Azure in the regionals. Start doing practices with Azure, stuff like that. why we do this? Lots of competitions. So how do you get on? You got to show up to practice. Pretty much one of the most probably major deciding factor of who gets on the team is who shows up to practice the most. We can teach you those skills, the technical skills you need to know. We cannot teach you dedication. So people going to CCDC, if you show up to every week, that's a really good chance that you'll probably get on the team. Ours is a big time commitment. Sometimes you might have class during practices. If that happens, try and talk to us to work it out. But showing up to practice is a big time commitment, which shows you're dedicated. You gotta be willing to learn as well. Come to practice and don't, kind of sit there and do nothing, obviously. If you really learn, ask all the good questions. We'll notice that people, decide that, we like you, want you on the team. Again, skill doesn't matter. We can teach you everything you need to know. You just need to have good work ethic. Again, we have multiple freshmen on the team, especially those that don't know as much. One right there, Vince, on the team last year, freshman. And mini competition, it's not the biggest factor, but there's a mini competition. If you go into mini competition, start yelling at your teammates, cussing them out, doing stuff like that, we're probably not going to pick you for the team because we don't want to be cussed out as your teammates and during competition when things get rough. Again, this is also a big time commitment. CCDC is going to be 10, 12, sometimes even 15, 16 hours a week, especially when it comes competition time. These competitions are 8 to 14 hours over 1, 2, maybe even 3 days. You gotta, have that time commitment to be able to go to these competitions and practices. So again, you can still come to practices. You don't have to try out to the team to come out to these fall practices. But if you do, there's 6 things to keep in mind. One thing I will note though is this isn't like us students choose the team. It's not like one big club where it's like, like we choose our friends to be on the team. How the process works is it's again, we represent the school, so the department chooses a team. What they do though is they take almost like recommendations from us. So we'll say, okay, I last year had this whole Excel spreadsheet of everyone who came to practices, everyone who wanted to sign up for the team, and gave them a whole rundown of their attendance, all the factors, their attendance, how they worked in competition, their technical skill level, which does, like I said, doesn't matter, but if we have 2 exact same candidates, but one is much, much better at technical stuff, gotta choose the better one just because if it's just even, but that's obviously not gonna happen. But the department in the end does choose, but we kind of have, if you're going to practices, does matter a lot. Actual competing. So competing at CCDC, we have qualifiers. This is a 15 plus teams in the northeastern region compete to qualify to go to regionals. It's mostly remote, so we'll just be up in the lab, remotely competing, and it's mostly the top half teams go to compete at regionals. Mostly, there's regionals, which we are in the northeast region. First place, last year RT hosted it, which is really cool. Hosted it in the cyber range. It wasn't in person, but the red team and some of the black team and hosts were there, like Justin Pelletier, if you know him. First place goes on to nationals. Second place goes to a relegation round where they compete in another competition against every second place team in all the other regions, and the first place of that also gets to go to nationals. The nationals is everyone in the country, top in every region, goes to compete. We've gone there probably last 4 years in a row, and then missed a year, and 5 years before that. It's pretty much national competition. I think if it's in person, which I hope it isn't this year, it's usually in Orlando, Florida. Very nice, very sunny. Very sad every year that we went to nationals, I never get to go. It was remote, so never got to go. But for those potential CCDCers, you may get to experience what I missed. That's pretty much the logo. And any questions? Where? You. So practices this semester are every week, 5 to 7. They are in NetLab and AirGap. I think Megan sent out an email earlier this semester about it. I'm not on the team. I'm retired. I graduated this semester, but I'll be helping out. Current captain's Craig Gibo, so you'll see him. But just come 5 after RTSEC. Every Friday until the end of the semester, and then probably next semester, depending on people's schedules. That's when nobody practices. What was your question, Tenchi?
Yeah, So if we wanted to get on the team, how should we prepare, like technical-wise?
Technical-wise, I mean, I would say first just come to practices, and then you gotta know your interests. So like, obviously we have Windows people who do Windows blue teaming, Linux people that do Linux blue teaming, network people that do networking blue teaming. You might not know what you want to do. You might know what you want to do. If you know what you want to do, that's great. Just study up, get really, really familiar with operating systems in your field. So if you're not a person, get really familiar with PSNs. Try and get familiar if you can with Palo Alto, stuff like that. Obviously, Palo Alto, you might need a license, so like that might be hard, but PSNs especially, get familiar with that. Do other blue team competitions is a good idea. Windows, Linux, get familiar with distros, your servers, your services, if you want to do stuff outside. But again, if you come to the CCDC tryouts, we'll start teaching you stuff you want to know. More info will probably be at the actual practice. But yeah. So networking blue teaming is, so usually blue teaming, you have a topology. You'll have all your services, like all your Windows and Linux, where it's like, oh, you have your web, mail, Active Directory, DNS. But all of that is in its own network that goes through a router and then out to like this competition network, right? To where red team is, where the scoring engine is, where everything is. So that router, pretty important place. It's a one, everything goes in and out of that router. So if you can make some, if there's a networking person that can make some really nice firewall rules that only allows the traffic that needs to go out and only allows the traffic that needs to go in to come in, you can stop a lot of red team attacks and traffic with that. You can also probably take down your entire team's network with that if you're not careful, but same thing. If you keep it secure, red team might try and use that against you, so having a blue teamer on that router is very important. What made our router person last year very sad was that regionals refused to give us a router and a topology to use, which is a sad time. But usually in most blue team competitions, you will have a router, so having a networking person is important to have on your team. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, this is a giant plug for CCDC, but yes, it's 5 to 7 today. Yeah, not loud.